You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to The Open Door, a show based on the words in Revelation, "I have left an open door before you, which no one can close." This is WCAT Radio's longest-running show, which opened the door to the radio station in October 2016. It's currently offered by Jim Hanink, Mario Ramos-Reyes and friends, and remains open to the love of God in its call to build a culture of life and a just social order through the panel's discussion of the Catholic social teaching principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, and economic democracy. The Open Door also explores nonviolence, distributism, and communitarianism. So join us at the Open Door, where you too can be part of the conversation.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelists Mario Ramos-Reyes and Christopher Zehnder. Today we discuss philosophy, the family, and politics. Our special guest is Mark Spencer. He's an associate professor at the University of St. Thomas, Minnesota. He and his wife, Susanna, are the parents of 4 children. He writes on the nature of the human person, beauty, and natural theology. Professor Spencer's first book, The Irreducibility of the Human Person, a Catholic Synthesis, is forthcoming from the Catholic University of America Press. We begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Let us pray. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit, we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Professor Spencer, Mark, could you begin by telling us a bit about your students?
Yeah.
I have to tell you before I get too serious here. I've been known to say that the word student rhymes with rodent. And I was corrected by a student. She said, no, it rhymes with prudent, not rodent. All right, go ahead if you will.
Thanks, Jim. And thank you for having me on this program. It's a pleasure to be here. My students are sort of varied. Many of our majors here at the University of St. Thomas are seminarians. I would say probably 75% of them are seminarians, and they're a real joy to teach. Many of our other students come from a wide range of backgrounds. Most of the classes that we teach are not for our majors, rather they're for the core curriculum. And I think it's that way at a lot of Catholic schools. Most of our freshmen are business majors or engineering majors. Those are by far our largest majors. So it's a bit of a challenge to teach many of them because they're not natively interested in philosophy. But it's a real joy to teach them as well, to sort of awaken intellectual interests that they didn't know they previously had. And to help them see that these philosophical problems, while they might seem sort of esoteric and intellectual at first, are really of importance to everyone. So we cover a lot of basic ethical and political sort of issues, as well as a lot of natural theological issues. Is there a God? Do we have immortal souls? Things that really should be and are of interest to everyone. The remaining philosophy students here at the University of St. Thomas, many of them are interested in going on in law, but they're very inquisitive, intellectually inclined sorts of people, and it's a real joy to teach them.
Mario is teaching teaching even now, manning the walls of Jerusalem, as it were. And he knows when students are given rave reviews, whereas in fact some of them need to have grave reviews. So I'm going to ask him to push you a little bit on this report, glowing as it is, of your students.
Well, about the students, what you're saying that you have a couple of type of students, seminarians and also let's call, I don't know, Gentiles or people who come from different perspective, background. And these people are the ones that you said don't have this attraction to philosophy. Or at least the attraction is different from those who are going to go into priesthood.
Yes.
Now, my question is there any reason why these people, those who come from different backgrounds, are not attracted to philosophy? Is there anything in their background that prevent them from being the way that they are? Is there anything in the culture that prevent them from being excited about the ultimate question, so to speak?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that influence them in this way. One is that they've just never been exposed to these sorts of questions before. Unless they went to a serious Catholic or Christian or classical sort of school, and that's very, very few of them, they've just never heard about philosophy. It's just not on their radar. The idea that you could ask these sorts of questions about the existence of God or the nature of the human person, and that you could do so in a rational way, that is a way where you're not just expressing your opinion or your feelings or what you've been taught in a particular religious tradition, but that you could really approach these questions through argument and through evidence, is just not something that most of them have ever even considered. And they've never been exposed to this sort of idea by their parents in their high school education or earlier education, or even many of them in their religious upbringing have never been exposed to the idea that there could be a rational approach to these sorts of questions. So it's just sort of not on their radar. And then I think a second thing that influences them is they've all been educated into a sort of what I would call utilitarianism. That is the view that everything that one does and everything that one learns has to be of instrumental value. That we really shouldn't be sort of wasting our time, so to speak, thinking about deep intellectual questions for their own sake. They're interested in, what can I do with this? What either pleasurable or profitable experiences is this going to give me? What am I going to be able to do with this job-wise? And the idea that we should sort of take a break from that approach and think about important questions for their own sake is just not something they've ever considered, and they sort of have a predisposition not to do that. So a lot of what I try to do is break down that mindset and introduce them to the idea that there might be questions worth talking about for their own sake.
Now, Christopher Zehnder has written books for the very sorts of students that you say might just have heard of these issues before. And the idea is that it's never too early for scholarship. And scholarship should lift up the classroom. And you want to pursue that, Christopher.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about not being exposed to these things, because I was raised a Protestant, and the basic sense of the Protestant group to which I belong was that philosophy is somehow a dangerous thing, something to be avoided for spiritual reasons. But also that same culture that you talked about, utilitarianism, was influential. Why would you go and study philosophy? What kind of money can you make studying philosophy? Well, I happened to have the good fortune to have a mentor in high school who was my Latin teacher. and he introduced me to philosophy. So I ended up going on and studying philosophy. The thing is that that was sort of like I would call my Hortensius experience. St. Augustine, he read Cicero's Hortensius, and he was converted to the study of philosophy while he was studying rhetoric in Cambridge. Do you provide a Hortensius experience to any of your students? Have any of them suddenly said, I'm a business major, but now I'm going to go study philosophy. I'm going to pursue wisdom.
Yeah, I've had a few, not a large number by any means, but a few. And that's enormously gratifying. And I find that I think in each case that I can think of right now, it's through reading the classics. So I do a lot of Plato, I do a lot of Aristotle in my freshman classes. And there are a few students, one every couple of years, that this is just incredible to them. This approach opens up a whole new world. And yeah, I've had a few students do that. I've had a few students who have decided to take their faith more seriously. I had one student who decided to not only take his faith more seriously, but become a priest as a result of one of my classes. But it's through that study of the classics that this happened. And in particular, I find Plato has this effect on people. There's just something about the way he writes and the way that Socrates asks questions that really appeals to a certain small subset of students.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know one of the arguments that moved me to the study of philosophy was precisely that it's useless. That idea that I'm not just an instrument of economic advancement, that there's something higher than that. And that I get appealed to a religious sense too. Before I became a Catholic, that there is something higher, there's something better, to which I'm ordered and which I'm directed. That is that I should pursue.
Yeah, I mean that idea was enormously influential on me as well, and I think I'm enormously privileged to be able to live a life in which I can spend nearly all my time thinking about things that are intrinsically valuable rather than merely instrumentally value. And it's also that which attracted me to the study of beauty, that I find beauty takes us out of ourselves and offers us an opportunity for contemplation that's immediate and that's, again, intrinsically worthwhile, and where I don't have to be spending my time thinking, what's the practical result of this? Yeah.
I think we all welcome those experiences, but they can go in the other direction. I once did a seminar that focused on possible worlds, and one of the best students in that seminar went on to become a podiatrist. He thought it would be better to keep both feet on the ground after that. At any rate, connecting with people's experiences, we know is critical, and you're not just a Thomist, you're a phenomenological Thomist. And that's got to do with connecting with experiences. Could you tell us a bit about how that works?
Certainly, yeah. So maybe it'd be helpful to sort of think about the two parts of what I take myself to be, the Thomist part and the phenomenological part, and then I'll say a little something about how I try to put the two together. So a Thomist, of course, is someone who is a follower of Thomas Aquinas, who builds upon the work of Aquinas and his commentators. And I think sort of in terms of actual beliefs, what a Thomist is committed to is fundamentally a realist worldview. That is the view that there are real beings, that the world is not merely a matter of our interpretation or our perception, and that we have access to real beings, and that we can reason about these beings causally, and that we can reason from the beings that we experience up to the existence of God. And furthermore, that the thing that is of fundamental and paramount importance in beings is their existence, that there's something about just the fact that beings exist, that beings are actual, that is should be the source of the deepest wonder. A phenomenologist is someone who is committed to contemplating and describing the structure of experience. So phenomenology is this very disparate movement that grew up over the course of the 20th century and now the 21st century. It's gone in many different directions, some of them helpful, some of them not. But as a whole, it has this commitment to wanting to describe very precisely how we experience the world and how the world shows up in our experience. This connects, I think, to what we were just talking about, this idea that we should engage in philosophy for its own sake and not merely for its instrumental value. I find that by studying the phenomenologists and that by doing phenomenology, every action I perform, everything that appears to me becomes a source of wonder, becomes something that can be contemplated. Phenomenologists spend their time describing oftentimes very basic experiences. What's a sensory experience like? What's a perceptual experience like? What is it like to move from sensation to intellectual thinking? So spending time very carefully and precisely describing all the contours and relations within our experience. And I personally find these two approaches to philosophy very congenial with each other. Each introduces us to a different crucial aspect of doing philosophy. So in the way that I do philosophy, I start with phenomenology. I start by trying to understand, how does the world show up for me? How do I experience things that are given to me in the world? And then I use that data, so to speak, as evidence to then reason about what sorts of beings actually exist. So a lot of my work has been on the nature of the human person. And what I do in my work is I start with how the phenomenologists describe our experience, and then I turn to how the Thomists reason from what is given in experience to an account of what our fundamental nature is. So we start with how do I appear? How do I show up in my own experience? And then I ask, what must I be fundamentally so that I can appear that way? And in this way, I put together both the world as it actually shows up and the world as it fundamentally is. And I'm able to do both very abstract metaphysical questions in philosophy, thinking about the fundamental nature of the human person. What is a soul? What is the relation between soul and matter? But then through phenomenology, I'm able to connect it back to my concrete, everyday, normal life and see how the things that Thomas and the Thomists are describing, often in very abstract terms, shows up in my actual life and makes a difference in my actual experience.
So where does Marcel Proust fit in?
Marcel Proust. I've only read a little Proust. I recently tried to start reading Proust's big novel in translation. My French is not that great. So I started trying to read it in translation. I'm going to be honest, I didn't get very far.
Now somebody might say, look here, Henry James should have been a philosopher, and William James, he should have been a novelist. When you talk about the detailed, textured experience of everyday life, mm-hmm. Why not assign some novels to students?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I've taught various works of Walker Percy, who was heavily influenced by the phenomenologists and the existentialists. And that also, maybe I should have mentioned that earlier when talking about works that have had a positive impact upon students and awakened a philosophical sense in them. When I've taught Percy's book, Lost in the Cosmos, that's had an enormously good influence on a certain subset of students, not everyone. Some people are offended by it. But yeah, I totally agree. And the phenomenologists themselves liken what they do to the work of novelists, artists. They are sort of trying to do what a novelist does, but in philosophical language.
Tolstoy has a wonderful short story, Man and Master. And it has to do with being lost in an ever-worsening snowstorm. And I suppose in Minnesota, that experience might be fairly widely shared.
Yes, yes.
Well, all right, Mario, take us forward.
Well, it is very interesting, your description of phenomenology and Thomism. But going back to students, it seems
going back to them.
It seems to me that the question to raise their interest is making them look at their own experiences. In other words, when a Thomist, an Orthodox Thomist, let's call that way, make argument and try to demonstrate whatever the issue is, any student, whether seminarian or not, feel detached from that argument, because that argument is something that perhaps is related to that person, but not exactly to his or her own experience. So we need a different way of making him that argument is something that he can see in his own eye. So the best way to do that, I think, and I found over the years, is let the student read novels. Because novels are biographies to some extent of some people. And when you relate to that character, then you can discuss whatever is happening to that character, whether it's Camus or any other great writer. Now, so if that then is the case, philosophy has been taught for years, and I was part of that, even though one of my teachers was a phenomenologist and was criticized for those Thomists. The question is about how to approach, but approach not in the theoretical sense, because otherwise we will say, well, that's, again, as an account of phenomenological method, it's still abstract. Rather, beginning with somebody's own experience, the student who has a name and live in a concrete city and so on. So if that is the case, philosophy move everyone, cannot not move everyone because it's part of the human experience. And now, concluding this rant, if you will, what Jim said about, or I think you said about utilitarianism. Even if we want to explain utilitarianism is very attractive when you start from human experience. And I have an experience this week writing an essay on John Stuart Mill and freedom. How freedom is really something that is part of the human experience. And I put some example. At the end, there was huge discussion about what? Happiness, which is in Benham and so on. So my point is that, do you think then, and I think you believe that the question of teaching philosophy is a question of method?
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with everything you just said. There has to be that connection to the student's actual life, right? I mean, the things that we're talking about in philosophy, of course, they can get very abstract, but they are things that are intimately connected with everyday life, right? We're all bodies and souls. We all experience real things. We all have a longing that can only be fulfilled by God. we all have, as it were, intellectual needs, right? Needs that go beyond merely making a profit, merely feeling pleasure, right? Needs that have to do with knowledge and freedom. And these are things that I think really every student, every person is concerned with, even if they haven't put these names to it. So yeah, I think it's absolutely crucial that the first stage, or maybe even the biggest stage of teaching philosophy, is showing the students how these questions arise out of everyday concrete life. So yeah, I think novel writing or novel reading can do that. I think also just having the students reflect upon their own experience and try to more precisely describe their own longings, their own needs, their own desires can be a great basis for opening up these questions. So they can see, yeah, in my own desires for happiness and my own desires for living in a more just society, my own desire for healthy relationships and so forth, I'm already asking these questions. I just didn't realize it. Or I'm already concerned with these issues. I just didn't realize it. So I've used the novel writing technique. I use a lot of art in class, paintings, music, things like this. But even more than those, I spend a lot of time having the students reflect upon their own experience. Whenever we come to a new topic, whatever it might be, virtue, God, beauty, whatever, we spend a lot of time just talking about their own thoughts, their own sort of, half-formed ideas, but still genuine beginnings of ideas before we turn to what Plato or Aristotle or Aquinas or whoever says about it. And in that way, I find they can see, at least to some extent, how these issues are really of importance to them, even if they didn't previously understand that.
I think Christopher, who for some time lived in California and experienced the beauty of this state, and then inexplicably moved to Ohio, will want to pursue this notion of beauty, sought and lost.
Oh, well, I don't know if I'm going to pursue that question. I have a follow-up on that. Very good question.
What a beautiful opportunity, and he waves it off. Go for it.
Yeah, somehow I wanted to avoid a place with drought and fires.
Yeah, we've visited California on vacations, and it is very
nice
beautiful.
Place to visit.
It's nice to visit.
Christopher didn't want to live there.
Yeah, we don't want to live there either.
If you go to Bakersfield, it's not so beautiful. But anyhow, I'm curious about this whole question of experience, because I think there was a corruption of Thomism where one simply relied on books. You see that in the 17th century, right? At least that's what it's criticized for. The corruption of scholasticism as a whole. But it's essential, as you know, to St. Thomas that all knowledge begins with sense experience, which is essentially saying all knowledge begins with experience. However, I think this is implied in what you're saying, especially when you're talking about novel writing. It's not merely my experience, it's the experience of everyone. So Aristotle asked the question, how do men speak? What do men say about this, right? And there's another thing I'm curious if you delve into this. I've thought a lot that tradition is of so immense importance because it's really the common experience of mankind. G.K. Chesterton talks about that, the democracy of the ages, right? And so history is of immense importance here, I would think, that the student gets beyond his own narrow experience. And really, our experience in the modern world is extremely narrow, where most students don't understand that there have been other ages, that people thought differently, that people lived differently. But to delve into that historical record and to shake them up a bit with saying that, people thought very differently about these questions than you do. Why should we prefer what you think to what these people think? How does one bring students, plant them into the soil of the ages and such in our time?
Yeah, I think this is again, a place in which reading the classics, reading Plato, reading Aristotle, reading these ancient writers is of enormous importance. So when I start off my first freshman class, the philosophy class they all have to start with at St. Thomas, at the University of St. Thomas, I say precisely what you just said. That is that by reading these older writers, right, these dead white males, we can be initiated into a worldview very different from our own, but also one that's had an enormous impact on our own. Mm-hmm. Now, drawing examples from history, appealing to historical experience is difficult, again, precisely for the reason I think you pointed out, that students just don't know history. They're not aware of things that have happened in the past. They haven't learned it. They haven't really been exposed to it. So I see myself as giving them a little taste of that, opening up at least the windows so that they can see that through reading someone like Plato or Aristotle, that there are different ways of thinking about, say, justice or beauty or about immortal life and God than the ways that they've habitually come to think about these things. And I think that is important because our own experience is not just isolated. Our experience is intersubjective. I experience myself, as it were, through the experience of others. My experience of the world is opened up by encountering others. And all of that needs to be brought to bear on these questions.
Yeah, that's especially true when you're married because your wife is always willing to tell you what she thinks about you, right?
That's right. That's right.
How she experiences you.
Yeah.
But I know when I taught high school, which I did for many years, one of the things I tried to do with students, I would take them out. We lived in a rural area, so I'd take them out into the fields because I realized these kids had no experience of even the natural world in which they lived. I'd ask them questions, and when you're driving on the road, I talk about the different oak trees that are in the area, and they had no idea they were there. Or I would ask them, I'd say, you believe, for instance, that the Earth revolves around the sun, right? I said, why do you think that? What do you experience? What is your? I'm not trying to convert it to geocentrism, but I said, what makes more sense, right? What do your senses tell you? And I want them to get back to that because that experience of nature, it just seems to have been entirely lost to most people in our time.
Yeah, when I teach aesthetics, I have them spend time with various beautiful objects. And I do a unit on beauty in nature, and I have the students, I tell them, you need to go out and you need to spend at least half an hour in a beautiful place, and then write about the beauty of that place. And they find it difficult, some of them, to spend as much as a half an hour out in some beautiful place. That's always surprising to me.
Do you tell them they can't bring their phones with them?
I should. I haven't done that.
I remember seeing in New Hampshire once, taking a hike. I saw a bunch of students coming, this young group of people, and they're all hooked up to music. And I thought, that's just horrible.
Yeah.
May I interject with a question? You said, Spencer, at one point, something that caught my attention, even though I didn't say much about that. You said, well, Thomism is what it is because in some ways it's reality and it's not subject to interpretation. Now, having said that, phenomenology interprets how we experience reality. I'm coming from a different world where the issue in philosophy has been forever, whether or not Latin American has its own philosophy or not. And what type of philosophy is that? If you come from a Thomistic perspective, you say that's a wrong question. Philosophy is what it is, it's philosophy. Phenomenology would say no. There should be a philosophy interpreted from the perspective of the horizon of that particular philosopher who comes from Argentina. So the Thomist there is a different type of Thomist, or at least has a different flavor. So much so that the whole debate for centuries, not centuries, but 100 years, has been precisely what type of philosophy is that one that we call Latin American philosophy. So you can have people from both sides, you can have people accuse one another of Eurocentrism and whatever the case. Now, my question is, to what extent culture, the circumstances from which one raises the question, gives some flavor or interpretation or hermeneutic to that particular experience?
Yeah, I think that the culture, the tradition, and lots of other background factors out of which we think have an enormous influence on how reality shows up for us. So I think what the Thomist needs to be committed to is that there are real beings and that we have access to them. But I don't think the Thomist should say we just sort of naively know beings automatically, directly, as they actually are. We've got to do some work of inquiry in order to get at a full account of the reality of some being. Right? Getting to reality is hard. And I think that getting to the reality of beings is facilitated by any genuine cultural outlook. So there are aspects of being, real features of beings that are discovered by certain cultures. I think the Greeks discovered certain features of reality that no other culture had discovered. But I think the same thing can be said, for example, of lots of other cultures. So in my aesthetics class, for example, in my own aesthetic work, I do a bit of work with Japanese aesthetics. I think there are features of reality that the Japanese philosophers got at. There are aspects of reality that German philosophers have gotten at. And likewise, there are aspects of reality that Latin American philosophers have discovered. A sort of total picture of reality requires that we draw upon all of these interpretive stances towards reality, recognizing that certain features of reality can only be gotten at through those cultural lenses. I'm not a Latin American person. I'm not a Japanese person, but I can learn from those cultures and the genuine features of reality that they've discovered. And I can try to synthesize those together in my own account of reality and thereby build up a fuller and more complete picture of what's really there to be discovered. So I have a sort of long-term project, for example, on beauty, in which I want to draw on lots of different cultural accounts of beauty and see, can we synthesize these together and give a more complete account of the actual beautiful beings that there are out there in reality.
Gentlemen, we have some loose threads in our discussion, more than one, and I'd like to try to bring them together in a knot. When I was a lad, not so many years ago, no one ever suggested that I go and put myself in a beautiful place and then write about it. I was told rather that when I was lonely and blue, I should go downtown and buy some stuff. And I wish I'd been told to go and appreciate that which is beautiful. And we've been talking about history and the importance of history, and there's a connection here. We have Dostoevsky, the novelist, who was deeply immersed in the history of his time, and as was the case with other students, now and then he had a call, and the call led him to Siberia. In Latin America, you don't go to Siberia, but you might go to un cárcel. Y es lo mismo aquí en los Estados Unidos. But Dostoevsky went on, in reflecting on his experience, to have a character that was presenting his own views at one point, in a book called The Idiot, to which we can all relate, that beauty will save the world. And fast forward in Russia, which has never taken us that much forward, even if you go forward by a century, we have Solzhenitsyn saying that so many lies have been told, it's really hard to talk about the truth. And it's not so, though, he says, with beauty. Beauty speaks in a way that is very hard to distort. And you've mentioned, Mark, on a number of occasions already, in barely 40 minutes, beauty. What sort of salvific role does beauty play? What's our soteriology of beauty? To wax jargonistic.
Yeah, for me personally, beauty is of the utmost importance. I've worked a lot with Swiss theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar, and at the beginning of his monumental work, The Glory of the Lord, Balthasar talks about how the goodness can often seem moralistic. It can seem a matter of mere rule following, merely doing what society wants us to do or what some authority wants us to do. Truth can be debased into, as you said, Solzhenitsyn says, lies, propaganda, jargon. It can become dry, bare argument. But when we see the beauty of genuine truth or the beauty of genuine goodness, there's a sort of immediacy to it. When you see a beautiful good action, say a beautiful act of generosity or a beautiful act of courage, you can immediately see why it's worth imitating. You can immediately see why you want to be that way. It directly shows itself to you with an attractiveness that is much deeper. It hits you as a whole person on a much deeper level than any argument or any mere concept or proposition could do. And likewise, when you see the beauty of the truth, when you see that some account of reality shines forth with splendor, that it directs our attention to genuine features of real beings, again, there's an attractiveness there that's inescapable. So I think that recovering a sense or gaining a sense of the beauty of the truth, wherever it's to be found, the beauty of goodness, wherever that's to be found, is absolutely crucial if we're going to save the world, both in the sense of like make the world a better place, improve our political condition, improve our social condition, and also in a personal or religious sense. I think it's absolutely crucial that we come to see the beauty of, for example, Christ and the Christian message. Without that, there's something lacking. Without seeing the beauty of these things, it fails to touch us at the deepest level and really convert us and bring us as whole persons into that way of life. So I think beauty is of absolute importance, not only on the personal level, but on the social level, at all levels of human life. And without a genuine sense of beauty, there's so much that's lacking.
If I may, isn't the problem, though, I totally agree with you on the power and importance of beauty. Like my children are musicians and artists and things like that. I've dabbled in some literature myself. But there's also the corruption, right? There's a corruption of, right? I think of Falstaff and Henry IV, Shakespeare's Henry IV, who can't understand the nobility of certain actions, right? It's beyond his comprehension. And the human taste, the human sensibility can be so corrupted, right? That what is actually beautiful and good can actually seem to some to be ugly and bad. I mean, how does one push through that when you have a culture, for instance, which emphasizes so much which is perverse even? and you have young people who are inculcated with that culture. How does one move? How does beauty then work?
Yeah, I find this is a fascinating problem and a genuine opportunity for breaking through to people. It's a fascinating problem because on the one hand, beauty can strike us with this deep immediacy. It can appeal to us as whole persons. It awakens our senses, our intellect, our feelings, our will, and sort of calls out to us, calls for a response. And yet even this, what I take to be most fundamental feature of real being, can be corrupted, right? It too can be turned into mere marketing, mere propaganda. It can also be debased in things like pornography and so forth. And so there's a sort of ineradicable evil latent in the world that we encounter even in the realm of beauty. And this is of enormous interest and a great problem that needs to be solved in some way. But I think it's also a real opportunity. It's an opportunity because even in the ugliest of things, even in the most perverse of actions, there is still some germ of beauty that can be found there. Beauty cannot be wholly eradicated from our lives, and people want to be appealed to by beauty, even if it's in a perverse or debased form. And so helping students, helping people at large, see that germ of beauty, that kernel of beauty that's there even in terrible things, and latch onto that and help them to make something of that, to draw something further out of that, and learn to set the other stuff aside, the ugly, the perverse stuff aside, I think is a genuine opportunity. I think here of Plato again. Plato talks about how we need to engage in this ascent to true beauty. We need to raise our souls up to see true beauty. But we start with the senses, and we start not with lofty scenes in nature or beautiful artworks or anything like that. No, we start with sexual attraction to a beautiful other person. And there we have something that is extremely easily debased, can easily turn ugly. And yet Plato sees there this germ of true beauty, of the loftiest thing. So helping students see that and work their way out of whatever ugly morass they've found themselves in, I think is a real opportunity that needs to be taken advantage of.
So doing for students what Plato tried to do for Alcibiades.
Yes.
May I say something about the implication of your very excellent account? It seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are proposing, I would use the word indictment, of a way of knowing reality, because we have been too Westerner and we trust too much on reason rather than on, let's say, affection, senses, and so on. So it seems that you are on the tradition of the East. You trace back to Dennis and all this via negativa, which I completely agree. Now, if that is the case, we can claim, it's a claim, that Vatican II was a rereading from an experiential perspective of the tradition of the church, a phenomenological reading. There is a book written about that. Now, according to critics, that reading have got us into a place where there is so much ambiguity in those interpretations that we are now in a very difficult situation. And they say, okay, that view that comes from that phenomenological tradition has got us into trouble. And then you have camps. We are fighting about these two, let's say, views. Even I would say that when you hear some preaching of bishops, they invoke values, principles, moral principle, which seems to me very moralistic. They are not talking about the beauty of Christ. The Pope does encounter attraction, all that, but the language of many bishops, not all, is very moralistic, so that you see the two traditions there, even though people may not realize that is at stake. What do you make about that? Is there any way that we can sit down and say, well, Balthasar is also got a point? Because one side just demonize Balthasar, the others, they know it's Garrigou-Lagrange. And so people who don't know much are completely at loss.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a difficult situation in the church right now. And I certainly agree with I can agree with the critics in a certain sense, in the sense that there are a lot of problems in the church. There were problems in the church before Vatican II, of course. But there are a lot of problems now, and they need to be worked through. But again, I think it's a sort of a genuine opportunity. It's a time in the church where there's the possibility of a great deal of growth and building up of how we understand the faith. I think, for example, of that metaphor that Pope John the 23rd used when he opened the council, of opening the windows of the church. We have the opportunity, even in the midst of current moral crises and moral problems, of really getting to understand, for example, the human person in a much deeper way. And what needs to be done is, again, I think education. That is, exposing people to the new truths, that have been discovered. For example, I think of, say, John Paul II's theology of the body, which describes aspects of the human person very much, in keeping with the tradition, but opens up new opportunities for understanding the human person, human sexuality, human labor, and so forth. So the solution is greater conversation, greater exposure, helping people see these new opportunities for understanding. It's enormously difficult, of course. As you said, there are these different camps. I have very good friends on both extremes of these camps, and it's really hard to talk to these people and to get them to approach these ideas with an open mind. But I think that's what has to be done. We just have to keep trying. And as with previous crises in the church, this is a growing period, and we'll get through it eventually.
Thank you.
Professor Spencer, you've been utterly realistic with regard to the potential corruption in the transcendentals. Truth can be corrupted, goodness, beauty. What about politics?
That can be corrupted too.
Opportunity here for growth? Or are we coming to the bitter end? What do you think?
I guess probably it's become clear through my answers. I'm a fairly optimistic person about things. No, I think there's a lot of room.
We'll check in later in the day. We'll check in later in the day. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that there's currently enormous potential for growth in very positive directions. People want something new. People are open to new ideas in politics, both good ideas and bad ideas, but in a way that I've never seen. I mean, I'm not that old, but I've never seen this sort of thing at any point in my life. And speaking with parents and grandparents, they haven't seen this sort of openness people have to new possibilities. There's the idea that the things we've been trying are not working, and maybe it's time to try something new, try new combinations of ideas. And so I think this is a very exciting time politically in our country and in the world. Of course, it can all go very badly too, but there's the possibility at least.
What about what the Wobblies used to tell us? One big union, one big strike. No, there's a more constructive way forward. And I think you as well as I know that the more constructive way forward is the American Solidarity Party. In 500 words or less, tell us why you've joined, why you're an advocate.
Yeah.
You've paid dues.
I've paid up. Yep. And my wife is the co-chair for our state party, and
whoa.
So we're full on board. I first became aware of the party back in 2016. I voted. I'll say it publicly. I voted at that time for the ASP candidate, but I didn't join at that time. I don't remember why. But more within the last year, both my wife and I felt called to devote ourselves a little more in a more committed way to this party. We're attracted by a number of things. First, the way in which this party seeks to express Catholic social teaching in all areas in the public sphere, right, in actual politics. And we're attracted also there, I suppose it's an attraction both to Catholic social teaching itself and then to the way it's expressed in the Solidarity Party, the way in which it is trying something new. It's not just sticking in the old left-right, liberal-conservative dichotomy. It sees that there's a possibility of having a coherent and full political worldview and political expression in the United States that cuts across those divides, that draws aspects of each, because each of those camps has discovered something genuinely helpful and true about how we ought to live our political lives. And then finally, just the idea of solidarity, this idea that human beings primarily exist to help one another. Human beings primarily exist to enter into community, to pursue common goods. These things are just sort of in keeping with my philosophical worldview and the conclusions I've come to through my own philosophical research. And I realized I want to have a political outlet, a political expression that fits with what I believe philosophically. And that just wasn't the case in the two major parties. And so for sort of personal logical coherence, this seemed like the best option.
We're just about at the end of our hour, and we'll have to get you back to talk about politics a lot more. We began with students, and students are often urged to be careful about what they put on Facebook. And you laugh, Professor Spencer, laugh. But in recent posts, you've been somewhat personal on Facebook. And so I have to ask you a final question. Why did you, tell us the truth, resume cross-country skiing after 20 years? And tell us the truth, is there a link between your doing so and your concoction of the perfect martini?
They happened on the same day, so that's one connection.
Whoa! A Humean analysis, please, a Humean analysis.
So I went cross-country skiing for the first time since I was in high school because my wife has been after me for a while to do it. I'm not a very athletically inclined person at all, and so I was a little nervous about doing it, but I finally said, sure, I'll go cross-country skiing with you because she really enjoys it. And so I went and I had a great time. And now the snow has all melted, so we can't go again. Maybe it'll snow more this next month. The connection to the perfect martini, which I did recently make, or at least it's the best martini I've ever had.
experience.
It happened. Yeah, right. It happened. It happened on the same day. My wife and I were doing various things to celebrate Valentine's Day, and so I was making drinks and tried that drink out, and it turned out very well. Both of these things, though, I think are connected to what we've just been talking about for much of the last hour: the desire to experience beauty wherever it can be found. Cross-country skiing seems like, I mean, I've only done it a few times in my life, but it seems like a great way to experience the beauty of the woods and the outdoors during winter, during a very cold and otherwise bleak time. And I have a sort of open conception of beauty. I think beauty can include the culinary arts. There's a sort of beauty to good food, good drink. And so I want to experience that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll end with the gospel for today, which tells us in a way that hits home and hits home hard about the beauty and the truth of service. As Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside by themselves and said to them on the way, "Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and scourged and crucified, and he will be raised up on the third day." Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee approached Jesus with her sons and did him homage, wishing to ask him for something. He said to her, "What do you wish?" She answered him, "Command that these 2 sons of mine sit, one at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom." Jesus said in reply, "You do not know what you are asking. Can you drink the chalice that I am going to drink?" They said to him, "We can." He replied, "My chalice you will indeed drink, but to sit at my right and at my left, this is not mine to give, but is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." When the 10 heard this, they became indignant at the 2 brothers. But Jesus summoned them and said, "You know the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and the great ones make their authority over them felt, but it shall not be so among you. Rather, whoever wishes to be great among you shall be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Just so the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Come, Lord Jesus, come." Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
See you later.
We'll be back in touch, knocking on your door.
Thank you.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.